The wartime era was a very hard time for the company and was most definitely a time that will have been cemented in the minds of Disney staff. The year was 1941 and the US had just entered World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan, with some of Disney's staff going off to fight in the war. With some of the staff being union members who had just finished protesting before Pearl Harbor. Meanwhile, Disney's audience was smaller, which meant that they had less revenue to pay to the workers, since Disney's films were not being shown in Europe, as this is where the fighting was happening. And to make matters worse, after Bambi flopped, the Bank of America refused to lend Disney any more money unless they did shorts. So shorts are what Disney had to do because they knew that they couldn't mess with the bank's trust. And so the package films were born, which are basically like a collection of short films put together, kind of like how Fantasia is made up of a whole load of short films. They made films like The Three Caballeros, in which Donald Duck went on an adventure. He went and he learned about a whole load of different types of birds, and then admired live action women in the creepiest way possible. This was also happening while Disney was putting out a whole load of propaganda films, with 95% of the films made in 1942 and 1943 being films made for the army. Some were even feature length, which they just about managed to get out, such as Victory Through Air Power, which was a film showing how planes were invented for the military. These films are a big departure from the wild success that was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs all those years ago. These were some of Disney's least popular films, and are films that some people don't even know exist. But these were the films that managed to keep Disney afloat during the wartime era, and without them, they probably would have died. And many shorts later, they managed to finally cap the era off. By that time, they had enough money to stop making shorts, as we now move into the Silver Age. World War II was finally over, but Disney was still very short of cash after the financial drain and generally bad time that was World War II. Disney was battered and bruised and just needed a break, which they finally got when the bank allowed them to go back to making a feature-length film, and so they made Cinderella, ushering in the Silver Age. Cinderella was a moment of deja vu for Disney. As with Snow White, they managed to put together a hugely successful film based in a fairy tale, while under a lot of financial strain. This was such a welcome break for Disney, but breaks never seem to last long enough for them. And this case was no different. Their next film, Alice in Wonderland, was a critical failure. And as Disney was expanding into TV shows, such as their new An Hour in Wonderland on NBC, and their primetime show, Disneyland, it quickly became evident that they needed to reduce costs. Disney's films just weren't doing that well in the 1960s. They looked magical and otherworldly, but traditional animation was a slow and expensive process to do, and they had to bring in massive audiences just to break even. They had to find a way to cut costs, even if that meant losing a bit of the Disney magic, especially since Walt was very tempted to shut down the animation department, as his focus shifted towards live action and away from his past in the animation team. So in a bid to save the company, Ub Iwerks got to work trying to find a solution, until he discovered xerography. Xerography basically works like a photocopier, directly copying artist drawings onto cell, totally removing the need for inking while still keeping the painting process the same. This was a lifesaver when it came to 101 Dalmatians, because drawing each individual dog would have taken ages. But with xerography now being an option, they were able to speed through the process and saved loads of time and money. But the quality of the films did go down. The lines were now messier, and they only knew how to do them in black at first, so they stood out a lot more than in previous films. But in the end though, it was totally worth it. Obviously, Disney is still a company now, and 101 Dalmatians became the highest grossing film of 1961. The company was saved by technology, even if that did mean that they were slowly edging away from their old animation techniques, which were now too expensive for Disney. But Disney was now about to lose a major part of their company, and they were going to have to rely on more than technology to save them as we move into the Bronze Age. Disney weren't going through the best of times. They were still making a profit, but people generally didn't think that their newer films looked as good as their older films. But hey, they were still somehow alive after all that they'd been through. Walter Elias Disney passed away on the 15th of December 1966 during the making of The Jungle Book. Now that he was gone, they were lost, and on top of that, a whole load of older staff members were retiring and a lot of new staff members were coming in from the Disney-funded school, CalArts. You may know some of them: Don Bluth, Tim Burton, and many more. This was a chance for the company to try new things, based in the ideas by the young, excited new artists, and that's exactly what Disney did. They moved away from their fairy tale adaptations and started trying new things, such as making a film about a great mouse detective called The Great Mouse Detective. And they also made a story about a cat hanging out with some homeless dogs, as well as other experimental films that were very different to the norm for Disney. Lots of times it didn't work, such as with The Black Cauldron, which was a lot darker than usual for Disney and failed miserably. They also started taking shortcuts, with them reusing some animation from their previous films. For example, they used parts of the Aristocats, Snow White, and The Jungle Book in making Robin Hood, something that the new animators weren't happy about at all. Overall, the films in this period just weren't liked as much as films in previous periods, and generally they just didn't do good, even though there are a few exceptions to the rule. That wasn't helped at all by the hostile environment that was at Disney between young and old artists. Eventually though, it got too much for Don Bluth, one of Disney's best animators. He had amassed a bit of a following while he was there, and had even started working on a side project with some of the other animators. He was very clearly talented, but he just didn't feel like he was getting the appreciation he deserved. Especially since there was a lot of opposition to him taking the director's role on Disney's newest live action film, Pete's Dragon, from a well-loved director and an original animator at Disney, Eric Larson. So on Don Bluth's 42nd birthday, he left Disney just like that, and took 13 young new animators from Disney with him. He went on to start his own company and made some well-loved films such as The Land Before Time and An American Tail, and he made The Secret of NEM, which flopped and almost killed the studio. I think it's a pretty good film though. Anyway, back at Disney, the already confused environment became even worse. After Don Bluth's departure, the release date of The Fox and the Hound had to be pushed back by 6 months at first, before it was pushed back even further and released after 1 year. And then there was an extremely long and complex strike. Long story short, new CEO, new COO, 1,000 people getting fired over the span of a year, and work almost getting outsourced to other countries. And then came a new player in upper management, Jeffrey Katzenberg. Yes, that Jeffrey Katzenberg. He joined the company as a studio chairman. He started bringing in very strict rules and was very stubborn about how he wanted films to be. He even personally edited The Black Cauldron after he wasn't happy with how the animators put it together. Disney was still in a time of transition, both because of the company's expansion into new ventures and because of the company's changing workforce. So much was changing at Disney, and without Walt's presence, it was made even harder. This period was a series of random expansions thanks to a lack of clear direction. This struggle was needed for what came next, Disney's Renaissance.